And this big silver plane came into view that had flown almost over our heads, almost over the building. Building vibrate a little bit. And then this big silver plane came into view that had flown almost over our heads, almost over the building at Ellis, the main building. And I wondered, what is this plane doing, flying in an unusual pattern, coming from the south and heading toward the World Trade Center? Is it going to fight the fire? Is it going to drop water on it? What is it doing? And it just kept on flying. And I have this kind of still shot in my mind of that silver plane just before it went into the tower. And then it just disappeared. It was swallowed by the tower, leaving a hole. We're about 1.5 miles away from the World Trade Center with a clear view across the harbor, and it was very surreal to see this happen at that distance. And there was a second or two or three for us to all kind of process what we'd seen. And then things started to click into place, that this was not an accident. We heard some radio transmissions over the park radio that made us realize there were 2 planes that had hit the 2 towers. And our
And we hear an uncharacteristic, deep, not so much loud, but a deep, resonating boom. And we have heard, quote-unquote explosions or similar kinds of sounds in the past, because somewhere in Jersey or somewhere, industrial or commercial or something is going on. Then you'll hear something, But this was kind of a little different, Mm-hmm. And we kind of looked at each other and just basically said, gee, that's different, And not automatically, but slowly we kind of were curious, and we started looking around, and then we looked towards the World Trade Center, which is very prominent, on the horizon, the vista from Liberty Island looking towards lower Manhattan. It's very spectacular, very attractive. It's a good picture-taking spot, So we have this beautiful panoramic view of lower Manhattan. The World Trade Center is very prominent.
I've taken pictures from here. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, and you can't help but look in that direction. You can't help but kind of always see the World Trade Center, dominate the skyline there. But what we see is a plume of black smoke coming basically out of the western side of the World Trade Center building, which is Tower 1, kind of as we're looking, the leftmost tower, and we know this is something, something serious, something extraordinary, because, something, and that amount of smoke was substantial, so we see something. And now we're basically craftsmen, tradesmen, blue-collar types, and when we look at that, or when we looked at it, the immediate reaction was, something exploded, something went off in the World Trade Center. And we started speculating, and we said, wow, what could that be? Substantial amount of smoke immediately. And right away, we're thinking that there's some kind of mechanical problem, a catastrophe, an explosion, maybe something in air conditioning or something. Mm-hmm. And couldn't figure it out, So we were standing there speculating this and kind of proceeding. We figured, well, it's an explosion. I mean, things happen in big cities and all. And
sure.
It wasn't normal, but it wasn't abnormal. So we knew something was up. And, we weren't going to run and, But we see that the smoke is pluming and everything. And myself, personally, the first thing that I thought to do was to go into our dispatch office, because we had installed surveillance cameras around the perimeter and different parts of the statue and the area. And I knew that there was a camera or several cameras that had zoom lenses that were able to zoom in on that. So I said, hey, maybe we can go in and get the dispatcher to focus one of the cameras, just out of curiosity. And so I go inside, and the person at the dispatch at the time was a policewoman.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it was the spouse of one of my colleagues at the time, and she was on the telephone. So when I walked in, I was going to ask her. Her name was Brunilda Fonseca. I was going to ask Bruni to focus the camera on the World Trade Center, and then we can kind of get a little better view. But she was heavily into this telephone conversation, and she didn't really kind of brush me off, but she kind of didn't really hear me. And I didn't want to interrupt her or anything, but I did overhear her talking to somebody, and the word airplane came out. And I said, oh, wow, yeah, that could be a possibility. So airplane. So, my mind flashes back to different kind of scenarios. And one of the more famous ones was the military plane that flew into the Empire State Building back in, I think, the 50s it was. Can't remember exactly the date, but it's one of the few times that an airplane actually flew into one of the skyscrapers here in New York or anywhere in the country. And I said, well, planes, yeah, this could be one of those 1 in 1,000 or 1 in a million or whatever. And then I, started thinking a little more extravagantly or exotically, and I said, well, maybe somebody flew the plane in or something like that. But who knew? No hard information. And then I kind of did. Now, she got into some serious tunnel vision type of thing. She just mentally kind of really didn't focus on what I was saying. I just said, listen, maybe you could put one of the zoom cameras on it, And I walked out, and coincidentally, where the interpretation rangers have their office, it's a little mezzanine in our administration building there. Mm-hmm. I overhear a local TV channel. After a while you get to know people's voices, and you kind of know it's one of there's actually Channel 7, ABC, Eyewitness News. So I kind of overhear this announcer's voice, and I walk up to the mezzanine, and one of the park rangers is sitting there, and there it is. Already there's either the news helicopter or something in the sky, and with the wonders of technology, you have this bird's eye view. Mm-hmm. There it is, this gaping hole. And the announcer's talking about an airplane and such, and speculation and this and that. And can't remember exactly, but it was kind of the stuff, how the response was, and police are on their way, and fire department. And I think they were interviewing actually some eyewitnesses, and they had the voice overs of the conversation, the news reporter and an eyewitness, and explaining that he saw an airplane fly into the building. Couldn't make out the plane, But I kind of counted the floors, and I noticed that this thing is encompassing like about 8 or 9 floors of the building. And I say, wow, that, fairly big plane. So I'm thinking, gee, anything from accident to deliberate to who knows what,
Sure.
So the fellows outside, basically didn't know. So then, and chronologically, from the time we were out there when we heard the explosion to the time I left and walked into the administration building, which is only like 30 or 40 yards, and that was about 5 minutes. And then spending a minute or two there, and then I might have spent about 5 minutes or so watching television. So this is already about 10, 15 minutes after the fact. And I go back outside and I walk over and looking, major plume of smoke,
Mm-hmm.
And then I go over and it was, boys, I heard that there was an airplane that flew into the building. Mm-hmm. And typical reaction, banter and everything, wow, what kind of airplane and this and that. And so we're standing there kind of speculating, and the police officer, Bruni, I think she had come out. Somebody had substituted her at the dispatch, but she went into the restaurant. And about that time, she had come out with a few coffees. Apparently, she went in and bought us a round of coffees. Her husband was working with us, Hector and myself, and 2 other guys from our department. So there was about 4 or 5 of us out there. So she came out with a tray of coffees. And there's a little parapet wall, and she had put it down there. And we're standing there, and then all of a sudden, from, I guess, the opposite end of Manhattan, which is kind of Staten Island, New Jersey, looking kind of south or so, and there's the canopy that's over the dock, and all of a sudden we hear this roar, and it's an obvious roar of an airplane, jet engines, very familiar. And anybody who's been near an airport or going to an airport, you know how substantially louder and different the roar of a jet engine sounds when you're at an airport or when you see planes taking off or landing and very close.
Right.
It's a deafening, very, very ground-shaking kind of roar. And just out of nowhere, we start hearing this roar, and it just got louder and louder and louder. And then all of a sudden, we turn around towards the direction of the sound, which is looking right opposite Manhattan. And then coming from over the canopy, just appearing out of nowhere, is an airplane on a very steep bank, very low. It's one of the things you noticed, or I noticed, that it was very loud and very low, unusually low for any of the normal flight patterns or such, because planes are always flying over the sky,
Right.
We have Newark Airport very close to us, and, the approaches to LaGuardia and the approaches to JFK sometimes, and, it's normal every day, but planes are never, ever that low.
Yeah.
So we see this thing screaming on a bank, flying right over our heads, right over the canopy, close enough where you feel like you can touch it, I saw the underbottom of it and all, and it's just streaking very quickly, just flies right over our heads, and we see this thing, and we look, and we turn around, and all of us kind of follow this plane, and like I say, we have this panoramic view of lower Manhattan, and this plane flies over, and it's on a bank. And it's flying away from us, so the illusion is if it's just going slow motion, because you really can't tell speed when something's coming directly at you or directly away from you. So it's kind of flying directly away, and it's very slow and just angling, and the Doppler effect and everything. So we're watching it, and I don't know how far we are from Statue of Liberty to the tip of Manhattan there, but it's couple of miles, so it takes several seconds, or I don't know. So like slow motion, this plane is just flying away, and it's just going towards Manhattan, and you just can't tell exactly if it's going straight at something. So my initial reaction that this was a military plane that was doing a flyby. It's the only thing that I can logically think at the time. I couldn't really make out whether it was a commercial plane, and it was just too fast, and everything's happening so quickly, So I see this plane, and it's going, and next thing you know, it's flying on an angle. First it was bright silver and all, now it's a dull gray and everything, just flying. First it was bright silver and all, now it's a dull gray and everything, just flying. And next thing you know, it's flying on an angle. First it was bright silver and all, now it's a dull gray and everything, just flying. And you can see that it's flying kind of in the vicinity of the World Trade Center. So I'm saying, well, if it's going to fly by, it's going to fly by. And the next thing you know, as it's coming closer, I mean, we hear some reactions. So I don't know if it's myself or my colleagues or somebody saying, what's that plane doing? And is that another one? I said, I think it's a flyby. And I say, well, damn, what if that's another one? And next thing you know, as it's going closer and closer, we're starting to realize that, hey, this might be another plane. And then a fraction of a second or so before it impacts, we see this plane really way too close. And then all of a sudden, pow, it just goes and it impacts. And because of the distance, because of that delay in sound traveling, you don't hear a thing. We just see the airplane disappear. And my reaction was, it was like something, like a dart or something being thrown at a porous object, and the building basically absorbed this airplane. The airplane just disappears. And it was on an angle, and it leaves this diagonal imprint, the size of the plane. Mm-hmm. And we really didn't see any of the debris flying, and from the impact, the back end of the building, or from the impact, which would be the north side and the east side, later on we saw that, that's the area where things had blown out. But it was this very surreal, bizarre image of this airplane just disappearing into this building, into the World Trade Center, not just this building. And then the split second that occurred, it's the realization that this is another airplane, And like anything, something that happens out of the ordinary, it's a sense of disbelief. Mm-hmm. The disbelief that, am I actually seeing this? I mean, you are, but it's like, can this be? Can this be? Can this be happening? This is extraordinarily malevolent, something bad. But you don't get, until later you start thinking about it, But this is bad. It wasn't gut-wrenching yet, because you don't want to panic, And it's so out of the ordinary that, you're stunned. Mm-hmm. And it's disbelief. And at the same time, it's like, wow, another one. And then it's like O-S and O-F and all of these expletives, And it's like, this is war. Mm-hmm. All of these reactions. I mean, something from, everything from serious to like now God, what's going to happen? This is war. This is not just an accident. This is deliberate, and this is audacious, ballsy. And now it's like, and then, because of the distance, several seconds later we hear boom, so that delayed reaction. And the sense of surreal, we're spectating, we're watching this from a distance, Mm-hmm. We don't put ourselves in that place yet, So we kind of look at each other and it's like, now what are we going to do? And no panic sets in, but people are definitely serious. There's this somber mood, and I think only a handful of seconds later, one of the police sergeants who kind of run, security and, in the pecking order of things, they're going to be frontline in certain behavior, and we've had some drills for certain, occurrences and, emergencies and evacuations, but they haven't been done on really the scale we think should have been done. There's some obvious problems if somebody has a heart attack at the Crown, things like that. How do you really effectively do things? We've prepared, but really nobody's been totally satisfied with preparations. There was a fellow who hand glided a power parasail, and in August, got hung up, and that was an extraordinary situation, and we had to move a lot of people, and it kind of gave us a good real-time drill to do certain things, in extraordinary times, but still lacking, somehow in the back of your mind,